Hi everyone. Over the last couple of weeks, there's been a lot of outrage across the country about the Bhopal Gas Tragedy and the verdict of June 7th, in which several functionaries of the company and its sister companies got away with nothing more than 2 years of imprisonment and a bail of 25,000 rupees, which they could execute immediately. Since then, there's been a lot of talk about extraditing Warren Anderson and about pinning blame for who let him off 25 years ago. But in many ways, these are not really the core issues of what we should be concerned about, the travesty of the Bhopal Gas Tragedy. The thing is that what was done for Warren Anderson 25 years ago is the same thing that successive Indian governments have been doing for Dow Chemicals, the company that really bought Union Carbide in 2001. The important thing to understand here is the continuum and the motivations of why both companies were allowed to get away. The logic and rationale of the government is that they wanted to protect the investment climate in India and to not scare off foreign investors. The thing that we should really be asking Indian governments is that what should India do and how far should India go to make itself a friendly society for foreign investments? The big problem today is, and there are many development projects and industrial projects that is facing resistance from people on the ground, and it is precisely for these reasons that in protecting the investment climate, and I say that in inverted commas, governments are allowing companies to get away with an attitude where they have all rights and no duties. To understand this, you have to go back to what really happened with Union Carbide. The night of the tragedy, Union Carbide was really an Indian subsidiary called UCIL, but Union Carbide owned 50% of it. They were the ones who had designed the factory, they took out the insurance on it. When the tragedy happened, it took several years of legal wrangling for Union Carbide to even come down to giving the compensation of $470 million. The Indian government had asked for $3.3 billion. It eventually settled for $470 million. But the important thing is that that was the first travesty, even more than letting Warren Anderson off. They allowed all criminal liability at that point, all criminal proceedings to be stopped against Union Carbide in perpetuity. It took national outrage similar to the one that we've witnessed over the last couple of weeks for those criminal proceedings to even be reinstated. Subsequent to that, again Indian governments allowed Union Carbide against the wishes of this court, actually, the trial court that was going on in Bhopal. It allowed Union Carbide to divest of its shares from UCIL, which was the Indian subsidiary, and to set up something called the Bhopal Memorial Trust, which Justice Ahmadi infamously now is, allowed this to happen and then became the chairman of the trust himself, which was a 400 crore trust. By allowing Union Carbide to do this, Indian governments and Indian courts allowed Union Carbide to divest from something which was already a legal wrangle. It was not a closed chapter, but it allowed Union Carbide to divest from this. And that is how today, from a legal sleight of hand, both Dow Chemicals and the Indian government have been arguing that Dow Chemicals, which bought Union Carbide in 2001, is not responsible for the Bhopal gas tragedy. But the thing is that the same company, Dow Chemicals, in America, has been putting aside something to the extent of $2 billion for what they call pending and existing cases of asbestos, sort of asbestos cases where people have been affected by asbestos, which is Union Carbide business. They're willing to put away money for it in the United States because the laws that govern that society and of how corporates must behave in that society are stronger than what they are in India. So really, if you must understand, what we should be worried about is that an RTI instrument brought out many high-powered official letters from Indian governments, including ministers like the Prime Minister himself, Manmohan Singh, the Finance Minister P. Chidambaram, he was the Finance Minister in 2006, men like Kamal Nath, Abhishek Singhvi, the who's who of the UPA 1 government, who have been in sort of agitated consultation with each other about how to allow Dow investment to come into India, because Andrew Liveries, the CEO of Dow, has written to them saying that he will invest in India only if the shadow of the great liability for Bhopal gas tragedy is taken away from Dow Chemicals. Now, rather than pinning him down on this and inviting him to do business in India, so long as he clears the old and bad debts of Union Carbide, the Indian government is bending over backwards trying to let them off. That is what we need to be concerned about. So today, Ratan Tata, in fact, the chairman of the Tata Industries and also chairman of the US-India CEO Forum, a very influential lobby group, offered the Indian government that Indian corporates would pay for the cleanup in Bhopal, so long as Dow would be let off. The disturbing fact in this is that he was not doing it as a purely humanitarian gesture, that while the long, prolonged legal case carries on, Indian corporates will step in and clean up Bhopal, and then the bill can be presented to Dow later. That is not what he was proposing. What he was proposing is that Indian corporates will step in as an act of magnanimity so long as Dow is let off. This is a very dangerous precedent to set, because then what should be a legal right for Indian citizens will become an act of private magnanimity. It will be something that we will be soliciting rather than asking as our legal right. Thankfully, for various reasons, Ratan Tata's offer was rejected by the Indian government, largely from pressure from civil society groups as well as from the Ministry of Chemicals and the Law Ministry. Today, something positive has come out of all the outrage that has come about in the country over the last 2 weeks. The government has revised the package of compensation, which was minuscule really. At the end of 20 years, victims had got something like 25,000 rupees. Today, there is an enhanced compensation that will go out. They are also talking about the Indian government paying for the cleanup and pursuing Dow in the courts. In many ways, these are very, very positive developments. But the thing to take away from this are two things. One, that till now what is being discussed as compensation and cleanup in Bhopal does not really take in the whole existing nightmare that is going on there. What is being discussed is 350 tons of toxic waste that are lying in the factory premises. But again, civil society has been raising flags about the fact that almost something like 8,000 metric tons of toxic waste is lying in what used to be the solar evaporation ponds of the Union Carbide factory. Nobody is taking that into concern. And that needs to be addressed now when civil society is repeatedly raising its flags. It should not be 25 years later that we again concede that yes, what civil society groups were saying 25 years ago is true and we will now remedy it, when again lakhs of people have been affected. That is one thing. But the larger idea is to really drive this argument more and more in public discourse about how corporations must behave responsibly as citizens of society. Today there is a sense that corporations act outside of society. The great business maxim is that the business of business is business. But today, in a sort of mature political societies, in the age of 24/7 television and media, people know what their rights are, and corporations have to understand that they have to narrow down the gap between being responsible citizens of society, which they are as individuals, and of the roles that they play as corporations. We are not interested in corporate social responsibility. We are not interested in how corporations give back to society. What we should be interested in is how corporations take from society. And I think that is the big learning from the Bhopal gas tragedy. I'll see you guys in another fortnight. Thanks for listening in.